A routine flight from New York to San Francisco becomes the stage for a life-altering confrontation. For 17-year-old Zoe Washington, it was supposed to be the first step toward her dream. For flight attendant Karen Miller, it was just another shift in a life spiraling out of control. But when a single, baseless accusation is hurled across the narrow aisle at 35,000 feet, it ignites a firestorm of humiliation, prejudice, and defiance. This isn't just a story about a missing snack box. It's about the moment a young woman refused to be a victim, and the devastating, irreversible power of a camera's unblinking eye. Stay with us as we unfold the shocking events that led one woman to public ruin and another to find a voice she never knew she had. The air in John F. Kennedy International Airport's Terminal 4 was thick with the scent of lukewarm coffee jet fuel and the collective anxiety of 1,000 intersecting journeys. It was a symphony of chaos, rolling suitcases clattering over grout lines, the disembodied drone of gate announcements, and the frantic symphony of last call pages for passengers on the verge of missing their futures. For 17-year-old Zoe Washington, however, the chaos was a beautiful, vibrant blur. She sat near the expansive window at gate B24, her worn, leather-bound sketchbook open on her lap. Her charcoal pencil danced across the page, capturing the determined posture of a businessman barking into his phone and the weary slump of a young mother trying to wrangle a hyperactive toddler. She saw stories in every face, translating the silent language of their expressions into lines and shadows. This flight, Ascend Air, Flight 715 to San Francisco, was more than just a trip. It was a threshold. She had won a coveted spot in the prestigious Summer Art Institute, a 6-week intensive program for the country's most promising young artists. It was the culmination of years spent hunched over canvases, her fingers perpetually stained with paint and graphite, her dreams vivid with color and form. Flying alone was a rite of passage, a declaration of the independence she was so close to tasting. Her mother, Dr. Lena Washington, a university professor with a will of forged steel and a heart of pure gold, had hugged her so tightly at the security checkpoint that Zoe felt her ribs might creak. "You call me the second you land," she had instructed, her voice a mixture of pride and apprehension. "Don't talk to strangers unless you have to, and remember what your father always says. If you're ever in a situation where you feel you're being unfairly treated, stay calm, state the facts, and document everything." Zoe recited the words, a familiar mantra from her father, a civil rights attorney. "I know, Mom. I'll be fine." Now sitting at the gate, she felt a thrill of adventure. She adjusted her noise-cancelling headphones, letting a lo-fi hip-hop beat wash over her as she added shading to the toddler's defiant pout. The boarding process began, and the orderly lines quickly devolved into a slow, shuffling herd. As Zoe's zone was called, she packed her sketchbook carefully into her backpack, slung it over her shoulder, and joined the queue. The line inched forward into the narrow confines of the jet bridge. That's when she first encountered Karen Miller. Karen, a flight attendant in her late 40s, stood at the aircraft door. Her face a mask of strained professionalism. Her blonde hair was pulled back into a severe tight bun that seemed to pull at the corners of her eyes, giving her a look of perpetual irritation. Her smile, when she offered it, didn't reach them. It was a thin, brittle thing, like a crack in a porcelain doll's face. Life had been relentlessly chipping away at Karen Miller for the past 2 years. A painful divorce had cleaved her finances in half. She'd been a senior flight attendant with a major international carrier a position with seniority and respect, until a corporate restructuring had seen her unceremoniously laid off. Now she was with Ascend Air, a budget airline where the pay was lower. The routes were less glamorous, and the passengers seemed to her increasingly demanding and uncivilized. Every shift felt like a step down a public confirmation of her failure, a mountain of credit card debt and a mortgage she could barely afford were the twin monsters that haunted her sleepless nights. She was a woman standing on a precipice, and the slightest breeze felt like a hurricane. As Zoe stepped onto the plane, her backpack, heavy with art supplies, swung slightly and brushed against Karen's arm. "Watch it!" Karen snapped, her voice sharp and disproportionately angry. The forced smile vanished instantly. Zoe's eyes widened. "Oh, I'm so sorry," she said, genuinely apologetic, pulling her backpack closer. Karen's gaze flickered over Zoe, taking in her dark skin, her neatly braided hair, her comfortable but stylish hoodie and jeans. It was a swift, dismissive appraisal, an unconscious sorting into a category. "Just be more aware of your surroundings," Karen said, her voice dripping with condescension. She then turned to the white man behind Zoe, her smile reappearing as if by magic. "Welcome aboard, sir. Let me help you with that." Zoe felt a prickle of unease, a familiar, unpleasant sensation she couldn't quite name but knew in her bones. She had felt it before the security guard, who followed her a little too closely, in a department store, the teacher who expressed surprise at her articulate essay. It was the subtle static of prejudice that hummed just beneath the surface of everyday life. She shook it off, telling herself the flight attendant was just having a bad day. She found her window seat, 22A, settled in, and pulled her sketchbook back out, determined to let nothing spoil the beginning of her great adventure. A younger flight attendant, a man with a kind face named Liam Peterson, moved through the cabin with a genuine warmth that stood in stark contrast to Karen's brittle demeanor. He caught Zoe's eye as she sketched and gave her an appreciative nod. "That's really good," he mouthed silently. Zoe gave him a small, grateful smile. But from the forward galley, Karen watched the exchange, a flicker of something sour and resentful in her eyes. The plane was her kingdom, a tiny pressurized tube where she had a modicum of authority, and she felt that authority eroding with every passing day. Every polite passenger, every happy family, every ambitious young person, like the girl in 22A, seemed to be a living, breathing testament to a world that was moving on and leaving her behind. And on this particular day, standing on the edge of financial ruin, her bitterness was a hungry, living thing, looking for something to devour. The Boeing 737 climbed through the bruised purple hues of the late afternoon sky, leaving the concrete sprawl of New York behind. Below, the world shrank into a patchwork of greens and greys, and above, the heavens opened into an endless, brilliant blue. For Zoe, it was magic. The hum of the engines was a lullaby of progress carrying her toward her future. An hour into the flight, the choreographed ritual of the beverage and snack service began. Liam Peterson worked the front of the economy cabin, his movements efficient and his smile easy. Karen Miller worked her way from the back, her cart rattling with a barely suppressed impatience. When the cart reached row 22, Zoe took off her headphones. "Could I get the artisan snack box and a ginger ale, please?" she asked politely. "That'll be $12, Karen stated flatly, her eyes avoiding Zoe's. Zoe handed her a credit card. Karen took it, swiped it through the portable reader with a series of aggressive jabs at the screen, and handed it back with the receipt. She practically slapped the plastic box and the can of soda onto Zoe's tray table before moving on her entire interaction, lasting no more than 10 seconds. It was cold, dismissive, and utterly joyless. Zoe shrugged it off once more. She was here for the journey, not the service. She opened the box, enjoying the small assortment of cheeses, crackers, and dried fruit as she watched the cloud formations drift by. This was her moment, a perfect slice of time suspended between her past and her future. Meanwhile, in the rear galley, Karen was doing her inventory. The process was supposed to be simple, but her mind was a whirlwind of anxieties. An email from her bank that morning had informed her she was late on her mortgage payment for the second consecutive month. A text from her sister was a passive-aggressive reminder about their mother's mounting medical bills. Every can of soda, every bag of pretzels, every overpriced snack box was a unit of her failure. She counted the premium snack boxes, the artisan ones like Zoe had purchased. The handheld inventory device showed she should have 8 remaining. She counted them. Once. Twice. There were only 7. A wave of hot, irrational anger washed over her. It wasn't about the $12 box. It was about control. It was about the relentless, grinding feeling of being cheated by life, of things being taken from her. Her husband, her career, her savings, her dignity. And now this stupid box. Someone had taken it, stolen it, from her. Her mind, primed for grievance, immediately flashed to the girl in 22A. The girl who had brushed past her. The girl with the expensive-looking headphones and the nonchalant attitude. The girl who, in Karen's warped and stressed-out worldview, represented a generation that got everything handed to them, that didn't understand rules or respect. She stormed out of the galley, her face a thundercloud. She marched down the aisle, her eyes locked on Zoe, who was now sketching again, lost in her own world. She stopped abruptly at the row, her presence casting a shadow over Zoe's sketchbook. "Excuse me," she said, her voice loud enough to turn the heads of passengers in the surrounding rows. Zoe looked up, startled. "Yes, I need to see your receipt for that snack box," Karen demanded, pointing a rigid finger at the empty packaging on Zoe's tray table. Zoe blinked, confused. "My receipt, I think I put it in the seat pocket." She fumbled for it, her brow furrowed. "Is there a problem?" "There might be," Karen said, crossing her arms. The passengers nearby were now openly staring, their conversations tapering off. The quiet hum of the cabin was replaced by a tense, expectant silence. Zoe found the flimsy receipt and handed it to her. Karen glanced at it for a fraction of a second before her eyes narrowed. "This accounts for 1 box. But my inventory is short. Where is the other one?" Zoe's confusion morphed into disbelief. "The other one, I only bought 1. "Don't lie to me." Karen's voice rose in pitch and volume, becoming sharp and accusatory. "I saw you near the galley earlier when we were preparing for service. It's easy enough to slip one into a bag when no one's looking." The accusation hung in the recycled air, ugly and stunningly direct. Zoe felt a hot flush creep up her neck. Every eye was on her. She was no longer an anonymous passenger, an aspiring artist. She was a spectacle, a suspect. "What? No, I didn't. I've been in my seat the whole time, except to use the restroom, before we even took off," Zoe said, her voice trembling slightly but firm. "Oh, really?" Karen scoffed her disbelief, a performance for the captive audience. "It's a classic move. You cause a little distraction, grab something when the crew is busy. I've been doing this job for 20 years. I've seen it all. A gentleman in the aisle seat across from Zoe, a well-dressed Asian man named David Chen, lowered his newspaper. "Excuse me," he said in a calm, measured tone. "I've been sitting here for the entire flight. This young lady hasn't left her seat since we reached cruising altitude." Karen shot him a venomous look. "With all due respect, sir, you're not trained to spot this kind of behavior." "I am." She turned her full attention back to Zoe, her voice hardening into a blade. "I'm going to need to see what's in your backpack." The demand was a violation, a public stripping of her privacy and dignity. Zoe's mind raced her father's voice, echoing in her head. "Stay calm. State the facts." She took a deep breath, her heart hammering against her ribs. "No," she said, her voice clearer now, stronger. "You have no right to search my bag. I bought one snack box. I have the receipt. I haven't stolen anything." "You are mistaken." Karen's face contorted with fury. This wasn't the reaction she expected. She expected tears, a stammered confession, a quick victory that would restore her sense of authority. The girl's defiance was like gasoline on the fire of her resentment. "We'll see about that." Karen hissed, her professionalism completely gone, replaced by raw personal animosity. "We'll just see about that when we land. I'm reporting a theft to the captain. You're going to be in a whole lot of trouble." She spun around and marched back toward the front of the plane, leaving Zoe sitting in a pool of mortified silence, the stares of dozens of strangers burning into her skin. The dream of her great adventure had just become a waking nightmare. The atmosphere in the cabin shifted instantly. The low hum of the engines now seemed to amplify the suffocating silence that had fallen around row 22. Whispers broke out like small brush fires. Phones which had been in airplane mode were discreetly switched on their small camera lenses, glinting in the dim cabin light. Zoe was the unwilling epicenter of a drama unfolding at 35,000 feet. She felt a tremor in her hands and clenched them into fists on her lap to still them. Humiliation was a physical sensation, a hot, creeping tide that threatened to drown her. She wanted to shrink, to become invisible, but the weight of 100 pairs of eyes pinned her to her seat. She stared resolutely out the window at the serene, indifferent clouds, trying to anchor herself to their calmness. Liam Peterson, the kinder flight attendant, appeared at her side, his face a canvas of concern and apology. "I am so sorry about that," he murmured, keeping his voice low. "Karen, she's been under a lot of stress. That was completely unprofessional and out of line." Zoe looked at him, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and gratitude. "She thinks I'm a thief. She's going to have me arrested." "That's not going to happen," Liam said, trying to sound reassuring, though a flicker of doubt crossed his own face. "There's no proof. It's her word against yours, and her behavior was unhinged." Up front, in the forward galley, Karen was animatedly talking to the lead flight attendant, a stern older woman named Brenda. Karen's voice was a sharp, insistent buzz, filled with righteous indignation, and she was so defiant, refused to let me look in her bag. "That's a classic sign of guilt," Karen insisted, her hands gesturing wildly. "I'm telling you, Brenda, she took it. I want to report it to Captain O'Malley. We need to have authorities meet the flight." Brenda listened, her expression unreadable, but tinged with weariness. She had worked with Karen for 6 months, long enough to recognize her colleagues' increasingly frayed nerves and volatile temper. "Are you absolutely certain Karen accusing a passenger of theft is a serious matter?" "If you're wrong," I'm not wrong, Karen snapped. My count was perfect before service. Now it's not. She was the only one who seemed shifty. You didn't see the way she looked at me. The confrontation had created a schism among the crew. Liam, overhearing the exchange, stepped forward. Brenda, I don't think this is right. The girl was polite. She paid for her item. Several passengers are saying she never left her seat. Karen was incredibly aggressive with her. Karen whirled on him. Oh, so now you're taking her side. The pretty little thing gives you a smile and you forget all your training. This is about following procedure and protecting company assets. The argument was escalating, contained for now, within the small confines of the galley. Brenda held up a hand, silencing them both. She knew she couldn't ignore a direct report of theft from a crew member, regardless of her personal doubts. Protocol was protocol. With a heavy sigh, she picked up the interphone to call the cockpit. Captain O'Malley, this is Brenda from the cabin. We have a situation back here. A passenger has been accused of theft by a member of the crew. In the cockpit, Captain Frank O'Malley, a veteran pilot with 2 decades of experience and a calm demeanor forged by countless mid-air challenges, listened patiently. He asked for the specifics: what was stolen, who was the accused, what was the evidence. Brenda relayed Karen's version of the story, careful to use neutral language. Flight attendant Miller reports 1 premium snack box missing from her cart inventory. She alleges the passenger in 22A is responsible. The passenger denies the allegation and has refused a bag search. O'Malley let out a long, slow breath. Of all the things that could go wrong on a flight, turbulence, mechanical issues, medical emergencies, a passenger dispute was the most tedious and unpredictable. All right, Brenda, he said, his voice a calm baritone over the comms. Here's what we're going to do. We are not escalating this further in the air. Keep Miller away from the passenger for the remainder of the flight. Tell the passenger to remain in her seat upon landing. We'll have the ground supervisor and airport security meet us at the gate to resolve this. I want 0 further confrontation in the cabin. Is that clear? Crystal? Clear, Captain. Brenda replied. She hung up and relayed the captain's orders. Karen's face hardened with a grim satisfaction. Good. They'll see I was right. Liam looked horrified. We're really bringing in security over a $12 box of crackers. It's the principle, Karen retorted, her chin held high. Brenda walked back to Zoe's seat. She leaned down, her expression carefully neutral. Ma'am, she said, her voice formal. The captain has been made aware of the situation. He has requested that you remain in your seat after we have parked at the gate. A ground supervisor will come aboard to speak with you. The word supervisor sounded like an indictment. The formal address, ma'am, felt like she was already a suspect in a case file. Zoe's blood ran cold. This was real. This was happening. Her denial, the supporting witness, none of it had mattered. Karen's accusation had taken root and was now growing into something monstrous. David Chen, the man across the aisle, leaned over slightly. Young lady, he whispered, this is an outrage. I want you to have my business card. My company has a top-tier legal team. If you need a witness or any kind of statement, you call me. Do not let them bully you. He discreetly passed her a card. Zoe took it, her fingers trembling. Thank you, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. The kindness of this stranger was a tiny life raft in an ocean of hostility. For the next 4 hours, Zoe sat in a state of suspended animation. She couldn't draw. She couldn't listen to music. She couldn't read. She just stared out the window as the American landscape unspooled beneath her. The vast geometric plains, the wrinkled majesty of the Rockies, the scorched red earth of the desert. Every joyful anticipation she'd had for this trip had curdled into a knot of dread in her stomach. She thought of her father, of his calm, steady advice. Document everything. She took out her phone, opened the Notes app, and began to type. She wrote down everything she could remember: Karen's first sharp comment at the door, the exact words of the accusation, Liam's apology, Brenda's formal instruction, Mr. Chen's offer of help. She wrote down the time. She wrote down the flight number. She was no longer just an artist. She was building a case. The act of writing, of creating a record, felt like taking back a tiny piece of her power. As the plane began its descent into San Francisco, the city lights twinkling like a carpet of fallen stars, Zoe's heart didn't soar. It plummeted. The adventure she had dreamed of was about to begin with an interrogation. The landing was smooth, a gentle kiss of rubber on tarmac. But for Zoe, every moment of the taxi to the gate was excruciating. The festive ding of the seatbelt sign turning off was for her a starting pistol for her ordeal. Passengers began to stand opening overhead bins, a collective sigh of relief and impatience filling the cabin. But Zoe remained seated a silent island in a river of people eager to disembark. Karen Miller stood near the front, a smug, vindicated look on her face. She was ready for her moment of triumph, the one that would prove she was still competent, still in control. The jet bridge connected with a dull thud. Brenda's voice came over the PA system, her tone strained. "Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the slight delay. We ask that you please remain clear of the forward aisle. Thank you for your patience." Through the plane's window, Zoe could see them waiting on the jet bridge, 2 uniformed airport police officers and a woman in a sharp Ascend Air corporate suit, her face set in a grim, no-nonsense expression. This was Cynthia Petrov, the airline station manager, a woman known for her icy efficiency and low tolerance for drama. The last of the passengers shuffled off, many of them casting curious, pitying glances at Zoe. Finally, it was just Zoe, the flight crew, and the 3 figures who now stepped onto the aircraft. "I'm Cynthia Petrov, the station manager," the woman in the suit announced, her voice crisp. "I understand there's been an incident." Karen immediately stepped forward, launching into her prepared narrative. "Yes, thank you for being here, Cynthia. This passenger in 22A, she said, gesturing dramatically toward Zoe, stole a premium snack box from my service cart. My inventory is off. She became belligerent and refused a search of her property. I am confident you will find the stolen item in her backpack." Cynthia Petrov's eyes, a pale, piercing blue, shifted to Zoe. It was not a warm look. It was an assessment. "Miss, what is your side of the story?" Zoe's voice when she spoke was quiet but steady. She had rehearsed this in her head 1,000 times during the descent. "My name is Zoe Washington. I purchased 1 snack box with my credit card. Your flight attendant has a receipt for it. I did not steal anything. She accused me loudly in front of everyone and demanded to search my bag, which I refused to allow. I have not left my seat since before takeoff, except for 1 time." "Aha," Karen interjected. "So you admit you were up and about. That was to use the restroom 90 minutes ago before the main cabin service even began. Zoe clarified, her gaze never leaving Cynthia's. The gentleman who was sitting in 22C, Mr. David Chen, can confirm that I never left my seat during the service. Cynthia's expression remained impassive. She looked at the officers. An airport was a place of rules and procedures. An accusation had been made. A process had to be followed. Miss Washington, I understand this is unpleasant, but we need to resolve this, Cynthia said. The simplest way is to allow a search of your bag. Zoe's heart sank. She was being railroaded. They were going to believe the uniformed employee over the teenage girl. The injustice of it was a physical weight. But then another piece of her father's advice surfaced from the depths of her memory. He had once been involved in a case about wrongful detention at an airport. They always want the easiest path, he'd told her. If you can give them a better, more definitive path, they'll often take it. Control the narrative by controlling the evidence. An idea sparked in her mind. A gamble. I will not consent to a search of my personal property based on a false accusation. Zoe stated, her voice gaining strength. But I have a better idea. One that will prove my innocence without a doubt, and without you violating my rights. Cynthia raised an eyebrow, intrigued by the girl's sudden confidence. Karen scoffed audibly. Every modern aircraft has security cameras. Zoe continued, her gaze unwavering. There are cameras in the cabin, and I'm certain there is one pointed directly at the galley where the flight attendants prepare the service carts. Instead of searching my bag for something that isn't there, why don't we review the in-flight security footage? It will show you exactly what happened. It will show me paying for my one item. And it will show you what really happened to your missing snack box. The suggestion hung in the air, a brilliant, unexpected checkmate. Karen's smug expression flickered. For the first time, a sliver of uncertainty pierced her armor of self-righteousness. The cameras. She had been so focused on the passenger on her target that she had forgotten about the silent, impartial witness that was always watching. Cynthia Petrov stared at Zoe for a long moment, a flicker of grudging respect in her eyes. The girl was smart. This was a clean solution. It was definitive. It avoided a messy he said, she said situation and a potential lawsuit over an improper search. That is an excellent suggestion, Miss Washington, Cynthia said, turning her sharp gaze to Karen. Flight Attendant Miller was your cart in view of a galley camera. Karen paled slightly. I believe so, yes. But that's a hassle. It's so much easier to just look in her bag. She sputtered, a note of desperation creeping into her voice. We'll do it her way, Cynthia declared, her tone leaving no room for argument. She turned to one of the officers. Please escort Miss Washington and Flight Attendant Miller to the operations office. I'll have the footage from Flight 755's aft galley camera queued up. Brenda Liam, you come as well. You were on duty. The small procession moved off the plane and down the jet bridge. Zoe walked with her head held high, her backpack clutched tightly in her hand. Karen followed her confident stride, now hesitant. The balance of power had shifted. The storm that had been gathering around Zoe for hours was now moving slowly but surely to hover directly over Karen Miller's head. The unblinking eye of the camera was about to become judge and jury. The operations office was a sterile, windowless room deep within the terminal, humming with the quiet energy of servers and monitors. It smelled of industrial-grade cleaner and stale air. The tension inside was thick enough to taste. Zoe sat on one side of a long conference table, her backpack at her feet. Karen stood on the other, nervously wringing her hands, her earlier bravado having evaporated into a cloud of anxious dread. Cynthia Petrov sat at the head of the table, flanked by the 2 airport police officers who stood stoically against the wall. Liam and Brenda stood behind Karen, their expressions a mixture of apprehension and grim curiosity. A technician worked at a computer console, his fingers flying across a keyboard. "Okay, Manager Petrov," he said. "I have the feed from camera 4, aft galley, time-stamped for the duration of the flight." "Where do you want to start?" "Start from the beginning of the main cabin service," Cynthia commanded. The large monitor on the wall flickered to life. It showed a grainy, black-and-white, wide-angle view of the rear galley. The image was clear enough to distinguish faces and actions. The scene played out in fast forward. They saw Karen and Liam loading their carts. Then the service began. They watched as Karen moved up the aisle. They saw Zoe, a distant figure in her seat, politely order and pay with her credit card. The transaction was clear. Karen handed her 1 box. Zoe put it on her tray table. There was no sleight of hand, no hidden movement, no theft. Zoe let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Part 1 of her story was confirmed. As you can see, she only took the one she paid for. Liam murmured, just loud enough to be heard. "Keep playing." Cynthia ordered, her eyes narrowed, fixed on the screen. The footage continued. The service ended. Karen returned to the galley with her cart. And then they saw it. On the screen, Karen looked flustered. She was trying to consolidate the remaining items while also responding to a call light from a passenger. A baby started crying loudly nearby. Distracted, she picked up the stack of remaining artisan snack boxes, 8 of them, to move them from the top of the cart to their designated storage drawer. But as she turned, the call light dinged again. Annoyed, she quickly shoved 7 of the boxes into the correct drawer, but the 8th one, which she was holding in her other hand, she inadvertently placed in the wrong compartment, a deep, shadowed bin used for storing extra napkins. She slid the napkin bin shut without a second thought, her mind already on the passenger who needed her attention. A moment later, she returned to do her final inventory, counted the boxes in the correct drawer, found only 7, and her face darkened into the mask of fury Zoe had seen up close. The truth was laid bare in silent, damning monochrome. There was no theft. There was no conspiracy. There was only a simple, careless mistake made by a stressed and distracted employee. The room was utterly silent. Karen Miller stared at the screen, her mouth slightly agape. The color drained from her face, leaving it a pasty, sickly white. She made a small, choking sound. The entire foundation of her righteous anger, the bedrock of her public accusation, had been a fiction of her own making. "Well," Cynthia Petrov said, her voice dangerously quiet. "That seems to be conclusive." She turned her icy gaze on Karen. "Karen, do you have anything to say for yourself?" Karen's composure finally shattered. Her face, which had been a mask of fury and then of shock, crumpled like a piece of paper. Tears, real and desperate, welled in her eyes and streamed down her cheeks. "Oh my God," she sobbed, her voice a ragged whisper. I was so sure. The stress, the mortgage. I'm so sorry." She turned to Zoe, her hands clasped together as if in prayer. Prayer. "I am so sorry. I made a mistake. A terrible mistake. Please forgive me." The tears were a performance, a last-ditch effort to garner sympathy, to mitigate the disaster she had created. But Zoe looked at the weeping woman, and felt nothing but a cold, hard emptiness. This apology wasn't for the humiliation. It wasn't for the prejudice for the assumption that a black teenager was a thief. It was an apology born of being caught. It was the desperate plea of a woman who saw her career, her very livelihood, about to go up in smoke. Before Zoe could even respond, the door to the office burst open. A woman strode in, radiating an aura of formidable intelligence and controlled fury. It was Dr. Lena Washington. Zoe had called her mother the second she'd been escorted off the plane. Her voice choked with tears as she explained the situation. Dr. Washington had immediately booked the next flight out of JFK, now having just landed and sprinted through the terminal. She was here. "I am Dr. Lena Washington," she announced, her voice resonating with an authority that commanded the attention of everyone in the room. "And I want to know exactly what you people have been doing to my 17-year-old daughter." She swept her gaze across the room, taking in the scene: the police officers, the corporate manager, the crying flight attendant, and her daughter, who looked small and shaken, but also resolute. Cynthia Petrov stood up, recognizing that the situation had just escalated exponentially. "Dr. Washington, we were just resolving a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" Dr. Washington's voice was sharp as broken glass. "My daughter, an honor student on her way to a prestigious art program, was publicly accused of theft, humiliated in front of an entire plane of passengers, and threatened with arrest over a box of crackers that your employee misplaced. That is not a misunderstanding. That is a combination of gross incompetence and, I suspect, racial bias. And I can assure you it will not be resolved with a few crocodile tears." She walked over to Zoe, wrapped a protective arm around her daughter's shoulders, and looked directly at Karen. "Your apology is rejected." Then she turned her steely gaze back to Cynthia Petrov. "We will be speaking to our lawyer. You will be hearing from him. Now my daughter and I are leaving." With that, she guided Zoe out of the room, leaving behind a stunned silence, the damning footage still frozen on the monitor, and the pathetic, hollow sound of Karen Miller's weeping. The unraveling was complete. The consequences were just beginning. In the age of social media, a secret has the lifespan of a mayfly. The story of Flight 715 didn't just leak. It erupted. Several passengers who had witnessed Karen's tirade had in fact been filming. A short, shaky video capturing Karen's venomous accusation. "Don't lie to me. I'm going to need to see what's in your backpack," appeared on Twitter less than an hour after the plane landed. It was posted by a tech blogger who had been sitting 3 rows behind Zoe. He captioned it, "On Ascend Air Flight 715. And this flight attendant is absolutely losing it, falsely accusing a quiet teenage girl of theft. Absolutely disgusting behavior." At Ascend Air. The video was a spark in a digital tinderbox. Within hours, it had 1 million views. By the next morning, it was at 10 million. The hashtags Ascend Air, Nashterm Flying, While Black, and a new one, Sashard Snack Box Karen, were trending globally. The court of public opinion delivered its verdict swiftly and mercilessly. Karen Miller was the villain. Zoe Washington was the symbol of grace under pressure. David Chen, who had also posted his account of the events, became the model of an effective ally. Ascend Air's corporate headquarters went into full crisis mode. Their social media channels were flooded with a tsunami of outrage. Their stock price took a noticeable dip. This wasn't just a customer service issue anymore. It was a brand-defining disaster. Cynthia Petrov's official report to corporate was clinical and damning. It detailed Karen's unsubstantiated accusation, her aggressive behavior, her violation of protocol, and the conclusive evidence from the security footage. There was no ambiguity. Karen Miller was suspended without pay, pending the final results of an internal investigation, a corporate formality. Everyone knew what the result would be. Karen's life imploded with breathtaking speed. She arrived home to find her picture screen grabbed from the viral video on the evening news. Her name, which had been dug up by online sleuths, within hours was plastered all over the internet. She was inundated with hateful messages and threats. Friends and neighbors suddenly stopped answering her calls. The community she had lived in for 15 years turned its back on her. In a desperate attempt to control the narrative, she started a GoFundMe page titled, "Help an Unjustly Fired Flight Attendant." She wrote a long, rambling story about her personal struggles, her stress, and how she was being made a scapegoat by a ruthless corporation and a manipulative passenger. The campaign raised $57 before it was shut down, due to a flood of fraudulent and mocking donations. The public wasn't buying her story of victimhood. 2 weeks later, the official termination letter arrived from Ascend Air. The reason cited was gross misconduct and behavior detrimental to the company's reputation. Bustle. She was fired, her airline ID was deactivated, and her 2 decades in the aviation industry were over. She was blacklisted. No other airline would touch her. Meanwhile, the Washington family decided against a quiet settlement. Zoe's father, Robert Washington, knew that a confidential payout would sweep the systemic issue under the rug. They wanted accountability. They filed a formal lawsuit against Ascend Air, not for an astronomical sum of money, but for specific policy-altering demands, mandatory enhanced de-escalation, and implicit bias training for all cabin crews, a clearer, more transparent process for resolving customer disputes, and a public apology issued directly to Zoe. Zoe, with the full support of her parents, became an unwilling but powerful public figure. She gave one single interview to a respected national news anchor. She was articulate, poised, and devastatingly honest. She didn't rail against Karen Miller. Instead, she spoke about the feeling of being presumed guilty of having her dignity stripped away in a public forum. It was never about the snack box, she said, her voice clear and strong. It was about being seen as a threat, a problem, a potential criminal for no reason other than what I look like. That flight attendant didn't see a young artist heading off to her dream program. She saw a stereotype. And I hope that by speaking out, other people in her position will think twice before they let their own biases turn a simple human interaction into a humiliating ordeal for someone else. Her words resonated with millions. The interview went even more viral than the initial video. The art institute she was attending issued a statement of support praising her courage and character. Art galleries and collectors began inquiring about her work. The ordeal that was meant to crush her had paradoxically given her a platform and a voice that reached far beyond the confines of a canvas. She was no longer just telling stories with charcoal and paint. She was telling her own, and people were listening. The karma for Karen Miller wasn't just about losing her job. It was about watching the young woman she tried to destroy become more celebrated, more respected, and more successful than she could ever have imagined. 6 months passed. The seasons turned. The viral firestorm around Flight 715 eventually subsided as all digital infernos do replaced by new outrages and new hashtags. But the embers continued to glow, and the lives they had touched were irrevocably changed. Zoe Washington thrived. The Summer Art Institute had been a resounding success. Her final project, a series of powerful charcoal portraits, capturing the faces of the passengers on Flight 713, some curious, some hostile, some empathetic, was the talk of the final exhibition. A prominent San Francisco gallery owner saw the collection and offered her a solo show, an almost unheard-of opportunity for an artist her age. The lawsuit with Ascendair was settled. The airline, eager to put the PR nightmare behind them, agreed to all the Washington family's terms. They instituted the Zoe Washington Protocol, a new training module focused on implicit bias. They issued a formal public apology. The settlement money was placed in a trust, which Zoe decided to use to fund a scholarship for underprivileged young artists. The incident had given her a purpose that transcended her own ambitions. She had found her voice, not just as an artist, but as an advocate. She was finishing her senior year of high school, fielding early admission offers from the top art schools in the country. The future that had seemed so threatened on that flight was now brighter and more expansive than ever. For Karen Miller, the world had only grown darker and smaller. After being fired, she was forced to sell her house, the one she had fought so hard to keep after her divorce. The proceeds were immediately swallowed by her mountain of debt. She moved into a cramped, depressing apartment in a rundown complex on the outskirts of the city. Her name and face were now infamous. Job interviews were a series of polite but firm rejections. The moment a hiring manager typed Karen Miller, flight attendant, into a search engine, the interview was over. The digital guillotine had severed her from her past life, and there was no reattaching it. Eventually, her savings ran out. Desperation led her to a temp agency that found her a position that didn't require a background check or a Google search. She now worked the night shift at a massive, impersonal e-commerce fulfillment center. Her world was no longer one of open skies and varied destinations, but of concrete floors, fluorescent lights, and the endless, monotonous drone of conveyor belts. Her job was to stand in one spot for 10 hours, scanning items and placing them into yellow plastic totes. She who had once prided herself on her authority and presentation now wore a drab safety vest and steel-toed boots. Her colleagues were strangers, exhausted and isolated in their own bubbles of financial struggle. There was no camaraderie, no small talk, just the relentless pace set by the algorithm. One rainy Tuesday night, during her 15-minute break, she sat in the bleak, sterile break room. A small television mounted in the corner was playing a national morning show. And then she saw her. It was Zoe Washington. She was being interviewed about her upcoming gallery show, Altitude. Behind her, displayed in elegant frames, were the charcoal portraits from the plane. The camera zoomed in on one particularly striking piece, a self-portrait of a young girl looking out a window, her face a complex mixture of fear, defiance, and unbreakable dignity. "Your work is so powerful," Zoe the host was saying. "You've taken such a negative experience and created something truly beautiful and transformative from it." Zoe smiled, a confident, radiant smile that reached her eyes. "Art is about telling the truth," she said. "And the truth is what happened on that plane doesn't define me. The way I responded to it does. The way we all choose to respond to injustice is what defines us." Karen stared at the screen, a greasy hamburger from the vending machine, forgotten in her hand. She saw the girl she had tried to break, now whole and celebrated. She saw the talent she had dismissed, now lauded on national television. She saw the future she had tried to tarnish, now gleaming with promise. In that moment, there were no tears of self-pity. There was no righteous anger. There was only the cold, crushing gravity of her consequences. She had made a choice, driven by her own bitterness and prejudice. She had chosen to see a thief instead of a child. She had tried to put Zoe Washington in a box, and in the end, The only person who ended up trapped was herself. The break room bell shrieked, signaling the end of her break. Karen stood up, dropped her half-eaten burger in the trash, and walked back to her station. The conveyor belt started to move, bringing another endless stream of items to be scanned and sorted. It was just one of thousands of identical nights, stretching before her a future she had built for herself, one careless, cruel accusation at a time. The story of Zoe Washington and Karen Miller is a powerful reminder that our actions, especially those born from prejudice and fear, have consequences that ripple far beyond a single moment. For Karen, a lifetime of small bitternesses culminated in one catastrophic decision that cost her everything. Her karma wasn't a supernatural force. It was the simple, direct result of her own choices in a world that no longer tolerates such open injustice, especially when a camera is rolling. But the true heart of this story belongs to Zoe. She faced a moment of intense public humiliation, and drawing on her own inner strength and the wisdom of her family, she refused to be defined by it. She didn't just win. She triumphed, transforming an ugly incident into a source of power advocacy and breathtaking art. This story shows us the vital importance of speaking up, of being an ally like David Chen, and of holding people and corporations accountable. If this story moved you, please hit that like button to help it reach more people. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you haven't already, subscribe to our channel for more true stories that matter. What are your thoughts on how this was handled? Let us know in the comments below. Thank you for listening.